Hello, welcome to another STEM story today. We're speaking with David Barrow, who is a service management consultant. And like most job titles, it probably doesn't tell you what the job does. Can you tell us a little bit about your role, Daniel? And thank you, David, and thank you very much for coming and talking to us today.
Yeah, of course, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. So, my role essentially is I work with leaders in businesses to help them run their IT systems, but I do so not from a coding perspective. It's much more from the experience of using a digital service.
Hmm.
So, in your everyday life, when you log on to Amazon or when you go and buy a book online or go onto ASOS or order your groceries if you're doing that. That's a service.
Yeah.
And I work with organizations to help them deliver great services
Oh,
and design them so that they've got human-centered experiences in mind. And it's not always been that way, but that's what I do today.
yeah.
I also write about the industry. I'm a speaker on the industry. And yeah, I've kind of, as I've evolved, I've added different layers to what I do on a day-to-day basis. But ultimately, I'm a service management consultant day to day.
That's really interesting. So I guess there's an element of it that's the tech, but then there's like understanding human behavior and customer service as well. So it's quite a lot
Certainly.
that goes into that.
Yeah, there is. But it all comes from my first jobs back
Yeah.
when I was a lot younger, where I worked on what you would call a help desk.
Yeah.
So people would call me with IT issues and problems, and I'd help them. But
Oh,
even then, I didn't start there. I started out just building computers at
yeah.
the age of 16, um, then tried to become a coder. So, for those of you out there that are thinking of becoming a coder, brilliant, go ahead and do it. But
Mm.
if you fail, don't worry, all is not lost because my boss in my second job told me I was the worst coder he'd seen in 20 years. So, there's still hope.
Very encouraging, isn't it?
Yeah. He then put me on the help desk, and he later said, "You're the best help desk person I've seen in 20 years." So
Oh,
swings and roundabouts.
yeah. That was so. I used to work in corporate roles, and I'm now self-employed, and I was delighted to become self-employed. But the one thing that I missed was the help desk.
Mm, yeah, Still my favorite job to this day.
Yeah, I need a help desk. They are, I mean, basically like the heroes of corporate world because anyone's people, whatever their job is, as soon as the tech goes wrong, suddenly everybody wants the help desk. You're the most important person in the room.
Absolutely. And nobody ever calls you to wish you a nice day or to
Oh,
ask you how the weather is where you are. They always call you with a problem. To the point where I've probably got a slight fear of phones ringing from
oh,
sort of 10 years of doing that. Um, but over the years, it went from being working on help desks to essentially being the fire service for big IT companies, like huge IT companies, where I was what's called a major incident manager. So when things went really, really wrong, I was the person that had to sort them out.
oh wow.
That could involve real world events such as 9/11, 7/7. It could involve whole sort of government systems being unavailable.
Yeah.
So that was a stressful role, but again, it was an evolution from those service desk or help desk days. But what it gave me was the ability to think on my feet and also to talk myself through situations and talk
Yeah.
others through them. So yeah, it's really it's a lot of soft skills in there, which is why I now work on the design and the operation of service experiences because I've seen so many things go wrong, and I've been party to that. In
Mm.
fairness, I've kind of helped them go wrong, through misunderstanding. That now I know how to make them go right, and
Mm.
and that's why it's so important nowadays because everything we do is digital. You go in your corner shop, there's a digital till there. Anything you do. Whereas back in my day when I first started, I was working just as the internet came along. That's how old I
Yeah. I remember that. I was talking to some students about that. Imagine a world pre-internet when we actually used to do all of our homework on paper and it would be delivered to us on the school whiteboard, and it was your job to remember that you had it. Can you imagine? No,
Couldn't take a picture of it.
no, exactly. And I mean, it seems insane now to imagine a world without internet, because as soon as your internet goes down, productivity completely dies. I can't remember
Mm.
anything I'm supposed to be doing for the day. It's all gone.
Yeah, yeah. It's incredible how the world's just evolved over that period of time,
Yeah.
and therefore how the workplace has evolved as well. And I guess it offers so many more opportunities to students,
Hmm.
but probably gives them more to think about that they're not even aware is there, and that's why we're here today. So that's a good thing, I hope.
Yeah, definitely. This so one thing, so as you were talking, it kind of reminded me of obviously there's the help desk experience, which I love. And it's a similar sort of feeling to me of visiting your GP when you're feeling a bit under the weather, because it's a case of the GP knows exactly what's wrong with you and exactly what's caused it. And then you have a very honest conversation about, have
Mm.
you been following a healthy diet and exercise plan? Have you been looking after yourself?
Mm.
Yeah, no.
Keep
And
me
then they have
honest.
to fix it, and then you come back again. And there must be a certain amount of like education that even when you don't have to, we can rely on technology. We don't have to necessarily know how to do everything when technology does it for us. There's a certain amount that it's useful to know just to make sure that it keeps working.
Absolutely. So if you've been working in coding, that's going to be really helpful. Um, but the key to technology nowadays, in my opinion at least, is something you mentioned about that GP experience. The
Mm.
GP will know those things because they've seen 20, 30, 40 other patients like you in a period of time. It's no different with IT. They exhibit the same behaviors or similar behaviors because it's humans that design them.
Yeah.
So when we talk about AI, it's not really it's there, but it's not quite where people think it is right now. It's
Mm.
still human based. So therefore, on a help desk or in my role, you grow to understand how something can be correlated to something else. It's called knowledge management in my field.
Mm.
And so you understand how things hang together that didn't look like they do.
Mm.
And that enables you to then help more than just one person. And that's for me is the great thing about help desks nowadays is you've got self-help, you've got YouTube. YouTube is a form of help desk for people nowadays. How do I go on YouTube? There it is, right in front of you. Podcasts are the same. So we're kind of joining all of these dots, but it's all facilitated by technology,
Mm.
and it's facilitated by great minds that have enabled us to put it all together.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's such an exciting space to work in.
Yeah. I mean, I find it really interesting. I love learning about new things and how things work anyway. So there's infinite possibilities there. But given that everything that I do and most people do relies on that technology, I just find it so interesting to think about how that's all working. And I imagine you must constantly have new things that you can learn about and play with. And
Yeah. Well, I think at heart I'm a technologist. Going back a long time now.
yeah.
The audience may struggle to think this far back, but in my household, growing up as a child, I was the one that could use the video recorder. I could blah 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 blah.
Mm.
Anything technological, I was good at. But my father's an engineer, a Royal Air Force engineer by trade, and I don't have a practical bone in my body, and yet he was keeping planes in the sky. I
Yeah.
don't know how it translated, but I ended up being good with technology.
Yeah.
Um, and so nowadays, I've still got the ability to see something new and break it down. My first job when I was building those computers came about by accident because I left school at 16. I went to like a career centre in my local town. I'm from a town called Congleton in Cheshire. And they took all of us unruly 16-year-olds, plonked us in a room, and then challenged us to go and do interview practice. So I ended up in a small organisation of two guys.
Mm.
And they asked me a question, which was, can you build a computer? And I couldn't, but I lied and went, yeah, I can build a computer. Um, and here's the good and the bad of that whole scenario is I walked into a room and saw a load of stuff around and figured actually I probably could do this. So they wanted me to build a computer, but I saw parts for 50 and I didn't really listen to the question, so I built all 50. Um, And that interview practice, so those 50 parts and components were there for other children or kids of my age, young adults, to come and build a computer too. But I built everyone's for them. And they gave me the job that day, even though it was an interview practice. So I completely fell into it by mistake.
Yeah.
But it was a great opportunity.
Oh my goodness. I love that story.
It's the truth as well, sadly. Yeah, my listening skills weren't very good back then.
You just, I mean, yeah, I mean, on the face of it, you did not follow the instructions, you lied, but it's just really positive. Like, it wasn't entirely untrue when they said, "Can you build a computer?" You clearly could. You
Yeah,
can build 50. And, like, obviously, it's the right job for you because once you started, you couldn't stop. So, definitely positive.
absolutely. Yeah, they came into the room, if I recall correctly. And my father actually told me this because I couldn't really remember how I ended up there, but my dad told me about the interview practice and the careers thing.
Hmm.
I could remember the situation. But if I remember correctly, they came in about 2 hours later expecting to find me still stood there with bits and were amazed when they just saw all the computers loading up what was MS-DOS back then. So I was installing DOS on each one of them. I did have a little background. My dad had bought me a computer when I was a youngster,
Yeah,
and I kind of knew how they hung together, but I'd never physically built one.
yeah.
But yeah, they came in thinking I was going to just be sat there surrounded by bits, and I was sat there surrounded by computers, and I was having the time of my life. Basically, it was like, great, this is for me.
Fantastic. I love that. Yeah. You're just in your happy place.
Mm, yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's really tickled me. Oh man. Um, so if somebody was interested in going into your field, what advice would you give them kind of from the position of being in school?
Well, I think the advice I would give them based on my own experience is I mentioned earlier, like coding is the most obvious example that people are led into from school and college in terms of qualifications. And I'm not saying rule that out because it's really, really good.
Mm,
But there's other things out there as the advice I would give them. So if you've got customer service skills, you're brilliant for help desks.
mm,
If you've got the ability to listen and empathize and judge a conversation, or you just enjoy talking to people, you'd be great for a help desk. Coding is fantastic. It's a brilliant skill, but don't worry if you can't do that. Is the advice I would give them.
mm,
If you can hold a conversation and you enjoy holding a conversation, you can do my job.
mm.
But also the advice I would give them is don't worry if it doesn't quite work out at first. I've just told you a fantastic story about how I got that job. What I haven't told you is that they sent me off on a BCS, it's not a BCS, a BTEC for computer studies, which I never went to. Um, it was on a Thursday night. I had better things to do on Thursday night. So I told them I was going there, but I was actually going out. It's probably not the best example to set. Um, so they got rid of me. Basically,
Oh,
they fired me. There you go. Um, but what I ended up doing was working for a couple of companies, but I ended up at a company called IBM. So before I talk about IBM, I would say is as a real piece of advice, companies like IBM, Capgemini, Accenture, big names offer great graduate and apprentice schemes. So look at those schemes. Maybe go and do some summer work internship with these companies. They will give you skills that go way beyond IT. So in my case of IBM, when I ended up there, they saw something in me that I had no idea about. And they sent me into a business school, which by that point, at 19, I was, okay, I'm committed to this now. It's been 3 years of my life. I should probably do something with it. Um, and they taught me things, which is where it's so useful today. They taught me about HR, so human resources. They taught me contract law. They taught me how to build a business case. They taught me skills that I had naturally, but I had no idea how to unleash.
yeah.
They saw that in me, but they will do that for you if you go and do an internship or if you go and do an apprentice scheme or a grad scheme. And so my advice would be if you've got an affinity or a desire to work in any area of IT, look at those schemes because They are fantastic. And
Yeah.
I know people that I've managed in the last few years who have come in through those schemes and now they've got a job for life. They're like your next C-level people, CIOs. I keep in touch with them because I know I'm going to need a job from them in the next 5 to 10 years because they're just doing amazing. They're having great lives. Our our industry is global, even though it's also remote.
Yeah.
So you can work from anywhere.
Yeah.
And for me, that's been the best thing about it.
Yeah.
Is the type of work, but also the ability to work anywhere. And I've been doing, people talk about when COVID came and the pandemic and everybody working from home. I've been doing it for 25 years because the technology's allowed me to do so.
Yeah.
Um, and so if that means something to you, it's great. But if also working in Dubai means something for you, or Singapore, or anywhere in the world, you can do that too. So to come back to the question, the advice would be look at the apprentice schemes, look at the graduate schemes,
Yeah.
and don't worry if you make a mistake.
Yeah.
You've got plenty of time to rectify it.
Yes. I mean, there will be mistakes. There's always mistakes, but they're usually the biggest learning experiences. Like
Absolutely.
it's the second time around that you got sent on a course, you went to the course. So obviously there was some learning.
Yeah, yeah, exactly that.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of themes in the conversations that I'm having on this podcast where there's there's opportunities presented all over the place, and the most important thing is to be open to taking them up and understanding what it is that motivates you, because it will be multifaceted. If you're into computers and technology, you may also be into travel or working with animals or creativity, and finding the opportunity that merges all of those things together is the one that's going to make you happy.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point you mentioned about the industries as well, because I work in IT,
Yeah.
but I, at last count, have worked in 27 different industries. So travel and tourism, government, media, tobaccos, oils, chemicals, I could go on, media. So because the world is built around IT,
Yeah.
you can work in all of these industries. And it just gives you this incredible ability to understand what's going on in the world,
Mm.
because you can see through the lens of being in these places, in these organizations. I've worked with small companies, I've worked with giant companies. As I mentioned, I've worked in government departments, I've
Mm.
seen how they run. Um, and yeah, it offers a myriad of opportunity.
Yeah. I'm tempted to ask a dangerous question that when you go into these companies and see things, do you have the opportunity to give them some feedback?
At this point in my career, I do.
Yeah.
That's not always been the case, but that's pretty much what I do now. So I'll work with organizations and I will kind of assess and seek to understand where they're getting things wrong.
Yeah.
That could be down to individuals, it could be down to technology, it could be down to leadership. And much of it's based on my own experiences as the individual, the user of the technology or the leader.
Mm.
And all of it's based on where I got it wrong in the past. But yes, and now I get to work with these organizations and help them develop strategies to deliver what they want to as an organization, also to innovate,
Mm.
to completely shift, because we live in this world now which is so volatile and there's so much going on and technology is changing all the time. So yeah, it's great at this point in my career. That's what I am. I'm that advisor to these senior people.
Mm.
um, but it's no different really when I was the advisor to the people on the help desk. It's still people that have a problem and they need some help.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually, I mean, this is not quite on the topic, but a very interesting thing that I learned in my career and employment. So everybody is just a person. It doesn't matter if they're the
Mm,
CEO or the cleaner in the canteen. Like they're all just a person. They have the same value and the same influence over your life, really.
completely agree. And it's a tough one to get over because I think we're brought up in this, at school and college and uni, we're brought up in, respect the teacher, respect the lecturer, and that's absolutely true. You should.
Mm.
Um, but when you're in the working world, you need to respect your leaders and respect their position. But I've always been a bit of a challenger. So knowing how to respectfully challenge somebody,
Yeah.
how to. There's a an acronym called ALLO, which is Ask, Listen, Observe, and Empathise.
Yeah.
If you do it in that order, um, then it's really good. So you ask somebody a question, you listen to their answer, you then observe the behaviours, and where needed, you empathise where things aren't quite working out for them, and you can maybe offer some advice.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's. I used to be ask, not listen, not observe too well, and not offer any empathy. But
Yeah.
it's just something that comes, I think, with experience and age.
Yeah. No point asking questions if there's only a specific answer that you're waiting for.
Absolutely.
I guess you must have to, because if you're working with, I mean, working in government fields and all sorts of things, that I imagine the person that had to fix the issue when the NHS databases were all hacked and pretty much destroyed, had to have a difficult conversation with somebody in quite a senior position and very capable at
Mm.
their job who'd messed up a big IT job.
Yep. I used to have a job in government where my overriding objective was to keep that government department off the front page of the tabloids. That was number one.
Oh God. No thanks for that responsibility.
Meant a call any time, day or night.
Yeah.
Oops, something's gone wrong. We need your help. Okay.
No, no. No thanks.
I don't
Crikey.
do that anymore, thankfully.
No, they're very good at putting themselves on the front page. I should probably stop talking about politics.
Yeah, I've got to be careful what I say. I guess though, if anybody's interested in a real example that's happening in the news right now, it's an awful example, but it's one that's enabled me to say to people, "This is what I do for a living."
Hmm.
It's the post office scandal that's all over the news right now, where the postmasters were wrongfully convicted
Oh.
of fraud. There's a TV docu soap program on ITV called Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, where basically 900 postmasters were convicted of fraud, jailed, their families torn apart, their communities torn apart um, in the last 20 odd years because of an IT system failure, which has effectively been covered up um, at all levels in the organisation and into government and the post office. That's the inquiry is ongoing right now.
Hmm.
But I guess my point is what I aim to do in my life, in my profession, is to stop that from happening. And in this case, it happened, and it's really sad that it did. But if anybody wants to get an idea of how you can contribute towards society through IT, that's a really good one to watch, because that's the scale of it going terribly wrong. And it can have a real human impact. And that's why I come back to that human design that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a completely fictional story that I was reading this year, but it was based on a criminal who operated by accessing databases, getting people's personal information, which was probably stuff related to their credit cards and shopping habits,
Mm.
and then using that to implicate them in his crimes to get away with it. And obviously it was completely made up, but it was just highlighting how much data there exists about each one of us in the world.
It's to relate to that example, it's not far from the truth. I used to work for a large education company who had to deal with two kind of types of hackers. There was the type of hacker that was looking to get access to exams and results. Fairly innocent, really, but still not a good thing to do. But then there was a type of hacker that was looking to get access to the information of all the young people that were in that system, and their intentions were a lot different.
Yeah,
And so in that particular context, you find yourself dealing with law enforcement agencies,
yeah,
you find yourself dealing with young people and their guardians, and that's really the scope of this world that we live in regards to technology. That there's so much information out there, and people want to do things with it that isn't quite as innocent as we'd like it to be.
mm,
So your scenario of fiction, it actually isn't too far from the truth.
yeah. It's a very good book series. There's all sorts of different things in there. The guy's clearly interested in technology. Oh my. Well, I mean, again, it highlights that there's so much potential within IT that just I mean, it's not a job; it's an entire industry.
Yeah, it's huge. So many roles.
So if we think back to David at school, who sounds
Mm.
like he was a little bit of a rebel. What was your favorite thing to study at school?
History.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
fantastic.
I saw the import. It's one of the few subjects I saw the importance in because it had happened and I wanted to learn about it.
Yeah.
Um, I think also because, if I'm being honest, looking back, I think history was good because you were reading about facts, whereas everything else was. I was like, how does this relate to my real world? So
Hmm.
um, I left school with four GCSEs. Um, Much of it wasn't down to me. I wasn't really a rebel. I was just a bit of a joker, and or just didn't really find the importance in it, which is really bad.
Mm,
Um, but now I'm all about education in terms of educating people into the value of what we do in terms of the technology industry and so on.
mm,
But I won't go back and say that I wish I'd have tried harder. I don't know if my path would have been the same if I had. But yeah, history was definitely my favourite subject at school.
yeah. I mean, I had that a few times actually, and I have this conversation with some of my students. Just learn. It's similar. I like science because I like to learn about the world. I like to learn about how it
Mm.
works and how everything interacts. History is learning about the world and the people in it and how they interact. And I guess
Yeah,
that's a large part of what you do now.
I think it is. Yeah, yeah. It's and a lot of what I do is retrospective. It's looking back and learning lessons from the past,
Hmm.
and then we implement that into the future. And I think that's possibly why I liked it. I've just only just thought of that right
Yeah.
now.
There's not a fair amount of IT in history, but there's the same sort of systems. People are still trying to do the same things. They're just
Mm.
now doing it with computers rather than
Yeah, absolutely.
whatever else they're doing. Smoke signals.
Well, I actually, I won't spend too long on this, but I do a series of presentations, and I've written a book about this. But I talk about the history of professions,
Yeah,
and you've got IT. That if this was a line of historical professions, IT wouldn't even fill my finger. It's barely 100 years old.
yeah,
Yet all of the professions that have come before it, I think the oldest, or it's definitely defined as the oldest profession on the planet is tool making.
yeah,
But really, that just began with trying to make something sharp, to start a fire or to build shelter or to hunt with. But I end up comparing technology with tool making and with seamstressing and
okay,
with ceramics because they're all industries that have had much longer than my industry, our industry. Um, Yet our industry in the last 100 years now absolutely is the modern tool. It's in everything. It's in every fabric of our lives.
yeah,
And unfortunately, we hold something like this much more than we hold a cup of sauce in there. So I
yeah,
actually make that comparison because it's come so far in such a small time that everything else is already catching up. That's why it's so exciting to work in.
yeah. I do find so I've um just recently been very interested in learning about like the history of different discoveries in science and who contributed to them and how they even got the ideas in the first place. And it is really interesting looking at the history of how computers were developed because it just
Mm,
looks so completely different to what we have now. There's lots of
yeah,
different things that went into it. So I guess it's probably that that learning is a lot older than we'd imagine.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you can go back to things. I'm not so well educated, but I think you can go back to Galileo in terms of computing.
Yeah,
Probably even go back to the Egyptians, I think. But yeah, the modern computers only really existed, give or take, since Bletchley and the war.
yeah,
So we're sort of 80 to 100 years. And
yeah.
then the area I work in, which is service management, has only existed for about 40 years.
Oh wow.
Um, and it basically, I'm told it came from um, in government. The government just couldn't manage all of their IT systems and all of their suppliers who were supplying the IT systems. So service management basically brings order to the chaos. And that's essentially what I do daily. I just bring order to chaos, um, or
Sounds
try.
annoying. Um, So just a little bit of self-interest here. So obviously my
Mhm.
job is as a STEM specialist tutor for GCSE and A-level students. So I
Mhm.
like to ask people, have you ever had a tutor or worked with a tutor?
Not a tutor
Hmm.
per se. I've had a gentleman that changed my view on what I do about 5 or 6 years ago,
Yeah.
who is a trainer, stroke tutor,
Yeah.
and writer. And even that late in my life, he inspired me to change how I looked at things.
Oh.
Um, Other than that, it's always been at school. I had some great teachers, but I didn't really allow them to be great in my mind. But yeah, he was brilliant. Completely changed my thinking.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Yeah, I think this is, I mean, everything I do is focused on school, it's exam prep, but I do it because I really think there's an importance in lifelong learning. We never
Mm.
stop being students, and as soon as you stop learning things, life becomes very boring.
And that's exactly what he taught me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's exactly that
Oh,
in a course.
sounds like a very
At the
intelligent
time,
man.
he is. He's great. Far more intelligent than me. Um, but I think at the time as well, I was working with an education company called Pearson, and their tagline is "always learning." So I think it was all coming at me from
Yeah.
different angles, and suddenly I was ready to receive it. Whereas
Oh,
previously, I'd been pretty closed off.
yeah. So on the moments where everything starts coming together. Oh,
Mm.
okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I was a bit late to the party, but finally I got there.
No, no, that's okay. Exactly. Always learning. It's fine. It's never finished.
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, David. I've really enjoyed talking to you. I feel like I want to have another conversation learning about computers and the history of IT because it sounds like there's loads more for me to learn. And I'm going to go and have a look at where will I find these books that you've written?
They're both available on all online bookstores, so you
Mhm.
could as easily go to Amazon.
Yeah.
Um, One is called Co-Creating Value in Organizations
Hmm.
with iTool4, and the other one, which is probably most relevant to the audience, is called An Education in Service Management. And it starts from that day in that room where they say, "Can you build a computer?" And it brings you up to date, but also it's built to show people their potential career in IT and to show leaders how they can enable that potential from their people. And I've got a series of people that have contributed to it from different parts of the industry at various levels.
Oh,
And I'm hoping it's an educational piece that can inspire people to get involved in IT and to make the best career possible.
wonderful. I love it. I'm going to go and look for that because I have lots of students who are interested in IT, computers, coding, programming, that sort of thing, software engineering. And I know nothing about it because I left school in 2002 and it was a very different landscape then. So yeah, I didn't even have the option to do computer science. But
Me
yeah,
neither.
I'd love to learn more about that. But thank you very much,
Thank
David.
you.
That was lovely. And thanks for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate that
My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
very much. This podcast would not exist without the sponsorship of STEMazing. I'm very grateful to Amazing, not only for sponsoring our podcast, but for the brilliant work that they're doing, fostering inspiration and inclusion in STEM. I recommend having a look at their website, stemazing.co.uk, which is what you can see right now, to see a bit more about the work that they do. Alongside the award-winning Inspiration Academy, bringing events into primary schools and inspiring young people to see their future in STEM, because you can't be what you can't see. There's a fantastic membership, which I'm a part of, for women in STEM to do more of this, fostering inspiration and inclusion in STEM, with monthly content shared on empowerment, inspiration, and community. Will help you to be a better role model and mentor to people in STEM. And finally, there's a brilliant library here of role models in STEM that you can go and have a look at and hear more about their STEM stories. Here's a shout out for our sponsor, Navigated Tutor. If you haven't seen this, I recommend having a look if you're in education. The Navigated Tutor platform gives access to a quarterly webinar and magazine and training resources. The first one I've already read and attended, and in minutes learned lots that's going to make a massive impact on the way that I support my students. This is brought to you by Arthur Moore, who is not only a fantastic tutor but also the host of the Tea and Teaching podcast and Tutoring Tips podcast, two of my most listened podcasts. So I recommend that you go and check those out if you're working in education at all, and sign yourself up to the Navigated Tutor platform for some fantastic CPD. You can get access to this at mooreedu.thinkific.com. That's mooreedu.thinkific.com.